Please be aware that because this final chapter for section 1 is a very long chapter, it has been split into two halves, part 1 and part 2. Chapter 10, part 1. Our Earth belongs to us. Outcome and solutions. Do you remember in the previous chapter when we mentioned that adapting to new environments is a very important aspect of human survival, and is especially relevant in our modern world today, now that there are nearly 8 billion people living on our fragile planet Earth, because we now have some brand new environmental pressures that are threatening our survival. So what are these environmental pressures? We now have a few individuals whose main concern is extreme ego greed for financial profits, that are exploiting all that is vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature in many different capacities, as you will discover throughout this very long chapter. But this exploitation is bringing us all to our own human downfall. This is the reason that we are more at risk today than ever before throughout our human history, because money can only buy the resources that nature can provide. Once we destroy all vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature, we destroy ourselves. This is the reason that the highly intelligent universal law of nature very recently tried to attract our attention, because our Earth is currently suffering and dying. And this is the reason that my allegiance will always lie in the protection of our Earth, for without her protection, our human lives will cease to exist. This is the reason that this final chapter for section 1 will not only provide us with the outcome of this exploitation, but also a few urgent short-term solutions. This is the reason that this is going to be a very long chapter, because there is a great deal for us to discuss if we are going to get to know our Earth before it's too late. So how can trees, organic and regenerative fresh-grown food products become some of the most urgent short-term solutions for our future survival and the survival of our fragile planet? It's a little complex, but I will try to explain why the decomposing wood and leaves of trees in forests and rainforests can become a major source of providing us with some brand new fertile agricultural soils in the future. So why do we need and urgently need some brand new fertile agricultural soils? Nearly 90% of our farmers have recently converted to intensive agricultural farming practices. But these new intensive agricultural practices are now destroying our world's fertile agricultural soils, for reasons that you are about to discover very shortly. However, now that we are destroying our world's fertile agricultural soils, we are also destroying the only commodity soil capable of growing all of our world's edible foods. This is the reason that we need billions more trees to be planted in our lands, forests and rainforests, because only the decomposing wood and leaves of trees can provide us with good organic matter, and only this good organic matter can be converted into all of the good microorganisms needed to provide us with humus. And humus is the only vital component that can create any future fertile agricultural soils. Because within this humus, we find all of the good microorganisms needed to create a good, new, fertile agricultural soil, such as all of the good bacteria, good nematodes, good protozoa, good fungi called mycorrhiza, and only trillions of these good and beneficial mycorrhiza can be found in trees' rhizosphere, in other words, in its tree roots. And this is why all of these good microorganisms, especially this good and beneficial mycorrhiza, play a huge role in retaining all tree and plants' healthy rhizosphere that retains the nutrition of all plants and trees. And this is the reason that all of this good microorganisms found in humus plays a huge role in the biology and chemistry of our fertile soils, and whether the soil structure will become fertile or not. But mycorrhiza not only retains the fertility of our agricultural soils, but is also the main solution for many global warming issues, as you are about to discover shortly. However, I digress, because without a fertile agricultural soil structure, we cannot grow all of our world's agricultural crops and foods. This is the reason that, very recently, these new intensive farming practices have been destroying the fertility of our world's agricultural soils through the ongoing spraying of gallons of toxic insecticides and pesticides, and even sometimes toxic herbicides that are sprayed on genetically modified agricultural crops, that are all destroying the structure of our world's fertile agricultural soils. And continued usage of these toxic agricultural chemicals is now beginning to deplete the trillions of good living organisms found in any of our world's fertile agricultural soils. And continued usage of these different toxic agricultural chemicals is now beginning to deplete the trillions of good living organisms that play a vital role in retaining the health of all of our world's fertile agricultural soils. But remember that, now that we are destroying all of our world's fertile agricultural soils through these modern intensive farming practices, we are also destroying the only method of growing all of our human edible crops and foods today. Because continuous application of these toxic chemicals is depleting and turning our world's agricultural soils into soils that are lifeless, that kills the trillions of good microorganisms vital in retaining a good, fertile agricultural soil. And some of these new intensive agricultural farming practices are even causing desertification to occur, a term that is used for the complete depletion of soils, dead soils that cannot be replenished. This is how 90% of all intensive agricultural farming practices are literally killing the very life of our soils that billions of people rely on to grow all of our edible crops and foods in all countries all over the world today. This is why each season intensive farmers and growers are having to put more and more synthetic fertilizers and manures onto these agricultural soils to try to bring back the life of the depleted good microorganisms in the soil, because the soils are now getting harder and harder to replenish. But if synthetic fertilizers are used for long enough periods of time, they also start to kill all beneficial and good microorganisms that are in the soil. These are the microorganisms that convert all of the dead plant remains into nutrient-rich organic matter. Also, nitrogen and phosphate-based synthetic fertilizers leach into groundwater and increase toxicity, causing pollution to rivers and disrupts aquatic ecosystems. Also, we must be aware that synthetic fertilizers increase the nitrate levels of soils, so that all edible plants that are produced from such soil, when eaten, converts to toxic nitrates in the intestines. These harmful nitrates reacts with hemoglobin in the bloodstream to cause methylglobinemia, which cause damages to the vascular and respiratory systems. All synthetic fertilizers damage the natural makeup of fertile soils in the long term, and plants that grow in overly fertilized soils are deficient in iron, zinc, carotene, vitamin C, copper, and proteins. This is the main reason that we urgently need to switch today to eating only organic and regenerative farm food products, because these organic foods never spray toxic insecticides, pesticides or herbicides. This is how they instead retain all of these trillions of beneficial microorganisms, good nematodes, good bacteria, good protozoa, good fungi called mycorrhiza. They are all vital for maintaining a good and healthy fertile agricultural soil. This is the reason that intensive farming practices, especially the extreme ego greed for financial profits of corporate agricultural chemical companies that persuade intensive farmers with monetary incentives to buy these toxic pesticides, insecticides, etc., and sometimes even herbicides, are not games they are playing. They are literally destroying our world's fertile agricultural soils. Therefore, they are also playing with all of our lives, because these modern intensive farming practices are literally destroying the fertility of our world's agricultural fertile soils. The Soil Solution to Climate Change film states civilizations rise and fall due to their management of fertile soils. Our survival depends on protecting and regenerating this important natural resource, this living universe beneath our feet called soil. Elaine Ingham, PhD, Chief Soil Scientist at Rodale Institute, states, every year an estimated 24 billion tonnes of valuable soil is lost forever, as soon as we start killing the living organisms with synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides, herbicides. You just go downhill faster and just destroy more and more of the biology of the soil. This is the reason that we must all make a collective global effort so that we all urgently work together to all begin planting millions of new trees in all of our different countries and all start eating organic and regenerative agricultural farm foods. Because the second and most important reason for these new and urgent lifestyle adaptations is that only trillions of healthy mycorrhiza, in other words, all good fungi, have the ability to attach themselves to the healthy roots of trees and plants, including all of the healthy roots of organic and regenerative agricultural soils. So why is this extremely important? Only the healthy tree and plant roots are able to absorb large amounts of carbon dioxide and other toxic greenhouse gases, instead of these gases entering into our Earth's atmospheric ozone layer and further expanding our Earth's ozone. Because once our Earth's atmospheric ozone layer expands, it exposes even more ultraviolet radiation from the sun entering into our Earth's ozone, and therefore warms up the Earth, creating even further global warming and climate change issues such as flash floods, forest fires, rises in temperatures, rises in sea levels, and many other different climate change issues that many of us are currently facing today. This is the reason that we all need to collectively work together to urgently help to stabilise all of these current global warming issues before it's too late. This is why some of the most urgent short-term solutions is that we must all make a collective global effort so that we all urgently work together to all begin planting millions of new trees in all of our different countries and all start eating organic and regenerative agricultural farm foods. We mustn't forget also that planting trees and converting all of our foods to organic or regenerative agricultural practices will also increase the oxygen levels in our Earth's atmosphere, a vital source for all of our human survival and the survival of all other species of creatures and animals. Because, as we mentioned in the previous chapter, only the great universal law of nature provided us with the photosynthesis that has the capacity to convert the sun's rays of energy, moisture, carbon dioxide, and a few minerals into the reproduction of all new plants and trees. And only plants and trees can convert carbon dioxide into the pure air that we all breathe today, oxygen. This is the reason that we must all begin to find the strength and courage to adapt our lives so that we all come together in collective peace and harmony with each other, free from all ego emotions, so that we all work together to all volunteer a small amount of time to begin planting trees in all countries all over our world today, and all begin buying and eating healthy, organic and regenerative farmed food products. But if it's not possible for you to plant trees, there are many non-profit tree planting projects all over our world today that you can generously help to support. Some of these tree planting projects and other information regarding organic and regenerative agricultural farming practices can be found in the index in the second half of this book, section 2. So why are all of these different global warming issues beginning to appear in most countries today? Amongst many other reasons that you are about to discover throughout this chapter, some of the main reasons are because our forests and rainforests are shrinking. Because there are now a few extreme ego-driven individuals whose main concern is simply ego greed for financial profits that are currently cutting down millions of our very important trees in our forest and rainforest for purposes of mining for minerals, metals and rare earth metals, or expanding the land for hectares of new intensive farming practices, or for fracking purposes in search of natural gas and other of our Earth's resources. This is why recently a large influx of rainforest wildfires are occurring in places such as Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, Peru, and many other areas all over our world. This is mainly due to the dry season, especially the tropical dry season, when fires normally occur as a slash and burn method used to clear forests for more intensive livestock farming practices, forestry logging companies, mining companies and biomass companies. The increasing rates of wildfire counts in 2019 have led to international concerns about the fate of the Amazon rainforest, the world's largest carbon dioxide filtering system. But it's not only that, because as mentioned earlier, all life here on planet Earth is interdependent on another for its survival, and all forests and rainforests are the only source of carbon capture that can prevent any further global warming. And all oxygen-breathing species, that also includes all us humans, All rely on the rainforests for half of the main source of oxygen. All animals, reptiles, birds, insects, and all other creatures on our planet Earth rely on the rainforests for the supply of our oxygen. At the same time, only our rainforests and forests have the capacity to build new streams and rivers, because it takes thousands of years for shaded canopies of trees in our forests and rainforests to provide enough shade to create enough moisture onto our forest floors that can begin forming new streams to develop. And hundreds of years later, once these streams have found an adequate moisture course in the forests, the streams will one day flow as rivers. Again, this is another reason why we desperately need our trees and forest to provide us with adequate fresh pure water. So how can the practices of buying and eating only organic and regenerative farmed food products hold many of the solutions to tackle global warming, amongst many other huge benefits? Organic farmers and growers all over the world today are regulated, meaning that these very special farmers are enabled by law to use toxic insecticides, pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, growth hormones, genetic engineered plants, herbicides, or any other toxic chemicals. So that when organic growers produce our different edible foods, all of the good and fertile organic microorganisms remain in the fertile agricultural soil structure. And this is how all of the good fungi, called mycorrhiza, can remain attached to the roots of the organic growing plants. And once attached, trillions of mycorrhiza begin to absorb the carbon dioxide that they use as their food source. And this is how all of the roots of organic grown crops and foods become a vital source of carbon capture that captures large amounts of carbon dioxide and other serious greenhouse gases, and are therefore helping greatly to combat global warming, just like all of the trees in our forests and rainforests. Similarly, all regenerative farm animals are also contributing greatly to combating global warming, because the roots of grasses that the farm animals eat, that are found outside in the fields and pastures, retain very long and deep root systems. They are never destroyed, never ploughed, and never sprayed with toxic pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, genetic engineered plants, or any other toxic chemicals. And therefore, all of the good fungi called mycorrhiza that are attached to the deep roots of the pasture grasses allow trillions of mycorrhiza to absorb carbon dioxide that is used as their food source, and that becomes a vital method for carbon capture that captures large amounts of carbon dioxide and other toxic greenhouse gases, and are therefore helping greatly to combat global warming. And all regenerative farm animals are never fed with growth hormones, but instead they are allowed to roam freely in green pastures most of their lives, unless, of course, it's very cold and they need to come indoors for the winter months. And many times the farmers will introduce chickens into these green pastures with the farm animals, so that all the bugs or parasites from the manure get eaten by the chickens. This is a win-win cycled solution, because it retains the health of the pasture grasses and retains the health of the soils, and also retains the health of the farm animals. Nearly all of our ancestors used these organic and regenerative farming practices, and this is why our ancestors were much more in harmony and balance with all Earth's nature. This is the reason that it's now extremely urgent that we all begin to help combat all of these very serious climate change issues by all of us making a concerted effort so that we all start now and all begin to switch from buying intensive farm food products to buying only organic and regenerative farmed food products. But I am fully aware that currently most of us don't have the money to buy very expensive organic and regenerative farmed food products. But we all need to make an effort. We all need to make one small purchase each week, because you are the consumer and only you have the power to persuade intensive farmers to revert to these more healthy and natural chemical-free, organic and regenerative agricultural farming practices. This is why the more we all start buying organic and regenerative farm foods, the cheaper these food products will become. Because it's a question of supply and demand. The more we demand organic, the more our farmers will have to supply organic, etc. And the more we buy, the cheaper the products will become. We can all find organically grown foods in all of our supermarkets that clearly state on the label that the food is an organically certified product. This means that all organic growers have to leave agricultural lands and soils pesticide-free, insecticide-free, herbicide-free, and free from using synthetic fertilizers and genetic engineered plants for at least 5 years before the farmer can be certified organic. Ian Davidson, Biology Systems, The Soil Solution to Climate Change film states, soil organisms have a very important responsibility to build the return of the carbon pool that's in our soils. These organisms, especially the fungi, have the ability to eat these food resources that the plant provides, so that the plant is fixing carbon from the atmosphere, and upwards of a third of the carbon that the plant is sucking out of the air is being pumped into the soil and being fed by this fungi that's in the soil. This is another reason that we are all interdependent and rely on nature for our own human survival. Because once we destroy all as nature, we destroy ourselves. So what other methods can help us all to rectify global warming? Climate change issues are beginning to affect many of us, and therefore they are quite rightly one of the most talked about topics in our current century. Because, as we have already discussed, most global warming issues are caused as a byproduct of too much carbon dioxide and other toxic greenhouse gases seeping into our Earth's atmospheric ozone layer. And, along with the slash and burning of our forests and rainforests, the other main reasons for the development of many of these toxic greenhouse gases have been caused through billions of our own individual car exhaust emissions and fuel consumed by millions of us travelling in our aeroplanes, and fuel for all of our homes and cooking, etc., and cargo ships and cargo lorries that transport all of our different consumer goods, as well as all toxic greenhouse gas emissions from millions of factories manufacturing all of our different consumer products, such as tons of plastic, metals, steels, coals and coking and synthetic chemicals that these manufacturing processes have to consume, billions of tons of our rare earth resources such as crude oil, natural gas, coal, minerals, metals and rare earth metals, etc. And all of these different emissions release different toxic greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous, oxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, formaldehyde, benzenes and soots, etc. This is why we are going to discuss many of these different manufacturing processes throughout the second half of this chapter. So what other ways are we all interdependent on nature for our own human survival? Adaptation has become the only solution for most species of life to adapt to new environments in order to survive, or not adapt and become extinct. And we all humans are no exception to this rule, because bee populations play a huge role in the production of all of our world's edible foods today, and have done so for many thousands of years. However, bee populations are now rapidly declining for reasons that you are about to discover shortly. This is why adaptation has become the only solution for most species of life to adapt to new environments in order to survive. For example, the survival of many hundreds of different species of wild plants, wild weeds, and many different wild flowers and wild grasses that grow in all wild areas throughout our lands, countryside, hills, mountains, woodlands and forests, have genetically adapted their seed heads into many different sizes and shapes, deliberately for the individual plant's survival, such as wild weeds that develop nasty, spiky seed heads, sticky seed heads, hairy or furry seed heads, etc. But we mustn't forget that all of these different species of wild plants took thousands of years to genetically adapt their seed heads to all of these different shapes and sizes. But why did the great universal law of nature create thousands of different wild plants to adapt their seed heads in this way, so that all of these different sticky, spiky or hairy seed heads would easily stick to the furs of animals' legs, such as sheep, goats, horses, cows and all wild animals, and even to our own human shoes or clothes while walking distances outside in the nature. And these animals or humans would then disperse these seeds to spread much further long distances throughout the lands, while the animals and humans were travelling, casting these seeds throughout the lands so that these seeds would begin to germinate and grow in many new and different lands, mountains, fields, forests, woodlands and countryside areas. This is how many different species of wild plants genetically adapted to find new ways to survive throughout many millions of years. In other words, the great universal law of nature intelligently designed many thousands of wild plants, species, seed heads to protect the wild plant's survival. But many different insects would also be attracted to all of these different coloured flowers. And just like all ecosystems within nature, these insects would then disperse the pollen in the flower heads that would pollinate and germinate the flowers to produce new seeds. And this is the reason also that the great universal law of nature adapted many wildflowers to become brightly coloured, so that they would attract all different types of insects to land on the flowers, using the wild plants as their food source. And again, just like all ecosystems within nature, this would also keep all insect populations abundant, and by keeping the insect populations alive, many different species of wild birds and other wild creatures would continue to eat insects as their food source. This is why, as we have already mentioned in earlier chapters, all nature is interdependent on another for its survival, and this includes all us humans. Because this is where all bee populations come into the equation. because bees have protected all of our human lives for many thousands of years, because our bee populations have become the main source for pollinating and germinating all of our different edible flowering plants that end up becoming a large percentage of our human foods source today for all of our different edible fruits, edible vegetables, seeds, nuts, berries, and 70% of our edible foods today. Because most flowering plants that reproduce all of our edible foods are called angiosperms. In other words, they reproduce sexually. In other words, they contain flowers that have male sex organs called stamens and female sex organs called pistils, but the part of the stamen called the anther that contains the pollen has to be moved to the female part of the pistil called the stigma in order to pollinate and germinate the stigma that then develops and grows into all of our different edible foods such as vegetables, seeds, nuts and fruits, etc. And this is why bees are very productive pollinators and can quickly flit from flower to flower, but the main reason that they are so productive is that they have very hairy legs, so that the bees are able to pick up large amounts of pollen at a time. And in this process of flitting from flower to flower, they are pollinating all of our flowering plants that will turn into many of our different edible foods today. If we don't have bee populations to pollinate our foods, we would have to pollinate most of our edible foods by hand. This is why our wonderful friends, the bees, are hugely important for producing all of our world's edible crops and foods today. And this has been the same case for many millions of years. But why would buying organic grown foods greatly benefit the lives and survival of most of our wonderful and very important friends, the bee populations? And why are intensive agricultural farming practices now killing many of our world's bee populations? Bees are able to safely land on organically grown flowering crops to safely take the pollen as their food source called nectar. Organic grown foods are safe because they are not sprayed with toxic pesticides, toxic insecticides or toxic herbicides. Because all organic farmers and growers have to be certified organic so that we can all be sure that our organic foods are grown only with safe, natural, chemical-free products. This means that for 5 years, all of our edible organic grown crops and foods can only be sprayed with safe, natural derived pesticides such as neem oil, a natural, safe, organic and biodegradable pesticide, and Bt, Bacillus thuringiensis, and nicotine and sulfur fungicide spray. And instead of spraying toxic herbicides to control weeds, all organic growers control weeds in the agricultural fields through the old-fashioned methods such as rotivating the field and the fertile organic agricultural soils, and natural crop rotations, hand weeding, and even sometimes mulching. And this is why all organic crops are safe for our fertile soils, safe for our streams, rivers and oceans, wild natural habitats, and safe to grow our healthy, human, edible foods, not to mention safe for all nature's insect and bee populations. Because the bee kingdom works similar to the ant kingdom. Each bee has a specific role to play: the worker bee, the drone bee, the queen bee, etc. Each bee is bred for a specific purpose. And although all bees are not created equal, all bees work together in harmony for the collective and greater good of the bee kingdom's survival. For instance, social bees work in groups in communities to create new larvae and reproduce new bees, and to help to build new honeycombs, hives, or make the honey that we all still abundantly eat today. Bumblebees, or honeybees, however, have another important role to play in the bee kingdom, because they are able to pick up large amounts of pollen taken from many of these different angiosperm flowering plants, and that bees will then use as a source of fuel and food called nectar, and for making the honey and honeycombs. The honeybees and bumblebees can do this because they have these very hairy legs and bodies that are able to pick up large amounts of pollen on their legs at one time. Pollen is a powdery substance made up of pollen grains. The pollen grains are the male gametes, sperm cells of the male part of the flowering plants, and each time they fly from flower to flower to pick up the pollen as a source of food and to take it back to the hive for the rest of the bee community, the pollen that the bees collect on their legs transfers the pollen to the pistil that contains the female ovule, and in this process germinates the pollen tube that then becomes fertilized. And once the flowers are fertilized, they can then develop into all of our different edible fruiting crops that we all eat today, such as all of our different fruiting trees that produce all of our different edible fruits, oranges, apples, pears, nectarines, peaches, etc., and all of our different edible vegetables, edible seeds, edible nuts, and all of our different species of edible berries, etc. And the most incredible part of all of this is that once bees first began this pollination process many millions of years ago, this is the exact same process that still continues to provide us all with all of our edible flowering foods today, all created through the great universal law of nature. This is why bees still help all of us humans in exactly the same way to pollinate and cross-pollinate all of our edible fruiting crops, fruits, nuts, seeds, berries, vegetables, and all of our edible flowering crops, such as tomatoes, peas, beans, pumpkins, aubergines, nuts, apples, pears, oranges, peaches, plums, zucchini, cucumbers, lentils, blackberries, red berries, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, pomegranates, flax seeds, and many different kinds of edible flowering crops and foods. The list is endless. Remember that without our wonderful friends, the humble bumblebees, many of our edible crops that we all eat today would not exist. And this is why bees have become mankind's best friend. However, nearly 90% of all intensive growers are now relying on the application and spraying of gallons of toxic insecticides and pesticides to kill bugs and pests on all of our different edible, intensively farmed agricultural flowering crops and foods. That is applied to reduce crop waste, that brings higher crop yields, therefore more profit to the farmer, all encouraged, by the way, through the extreme ego greed of corporate agrochemical companies, whose main concern is financial profits from selling all of these different toxic insecticide and pesticides to the intensive farmers. But in this process of spraying these toxic chemicals, millions of honeybees and bumblebees are flying from flower to flower to pick up their pollen and are coming into contact with these toxic chemicals. And many of these toxic chemicals are systemic in nature. So what does systemic mean? Many of these toxic pesticides and insecticides sprayed onto these intensive grown crops are taken up through the root systems of these edible plants and up into the inner stems and leaves of the edible plants, so that the pests and bugs that eat the crops are reluctant to eat these poison crops. But some of these toxic chemicals also contaminate the pollen that is then collected by many of the bees that land to take the pollen as their food source, nectar. The bees then become paralysed. That affects their nervous system, and they slowly die a painful death. And even some bees transport this contaminated pollen back to the colony, causing death to the entire bee colony. This is why some particular pesticides are linked to colony collapse disorder, causing thousands of bees in the colony to slowly die from these toxic chemicals. In other words, these modern intensive farming practices are poisoning the very bees that we all rely on to grow tons of our different edible crops and foods today. As mentioned earlier, we are all interdependent and rely on nature for our own human survival. Once we destroy all Earth's nature, we destroy ourselves. This is the reason that organic grown foods, organic crops, organic seeds, organic wheats, organic nuts, organic vegetables, organic fruits, and all organic grown crops and foods are a win-win situation for our earth and for all of our lives today. Because bees can safely land on chemical-free organic grown crops and foods and will never become sick and die, and therefore bees will continue to pollinate, germinate and grow all of our different healthy organic grown crops and foods for all generations to come. Not to mention that all of these new chemical-free fertile organic agricultural soils will be able to retain all of the good organic matter and microorganisms in the soil and will therefore provide us all with abundance of healthy, nutritious, safe, chemical-free foods. At the same time, millions of hectares of new, organic, fertile agricultural soils can then become a huge carbon capture, contributing greatly in helping to prevent all of these current increasing global warming and climate change issues. This is why it's now up to all of us, to the consumer, because only the consumer has the power and strength to shift our agricultural food supplies to organic. This is why we can all learn a great deal from the bee kingdom's community, because although all bees are not created equal, all bees work together in harmony and balance with each other for the collective and greater good of the bee kingdom's survival. Remember that we are all interdependent and rely on nature for our own human survival. Once we destroy all Earth's nature, we destroy ourselves. This is the reason that you can begin reading all about these very serious environmental concerns in the index for Chapter 10, so that you can begin your own research in your own time and at your own leisure. This is the reason that we now urgently need a brand new collective global Earth government, a collective global government of the people, run by the people, for the people, that will not be a top-down but a parallel governance, that all people globally will get involved equally in decision-making through global dialogues, free from all ego emotions, so that we all begin a collective voluntary effort, so that each individual person joins together to create peaceful collective global dialogue and peaceful actions, so that we all work together to solve these very serious earth issues, so that we all begin to help protect all that is vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature in all different capacities before it's too late. For instance, we all start to have a vote in the fate of the Amazon rainforests, the world's largest carbon dioxide filtering system, and the slash and burning methods that are currently exploiting all vulnerable that belongs to all the Amazon rainforests. Of course, there are a few governments that are already helping to reduce these carbon emissions, etc. But individual governments are not enough. It urgently needs a structured and disciplined collective global Earth government to take control of all of these very serious earth issues before it's too late. So why is it urgently important for us all to begin a brand new collective global earth government that can become a major short-term solution? First and foremost, we are running out of time because we currently have a few individuals whose main concern is extreme ego greed for financial profits that are now exploiting all that is vulnerable that belongs to all earth nature in all different capacities, as we are going to continue to discuss throughout this final chapter for section 1. This is the reason that we are more at risk today than ever before throughout our human history. Secondly, each individual country's governments are currently separated and fractured from all other countries' governments, because each government has their own individual agendas that are mainly connected to their own individual political ideologies, principles and beliefs, all developed and controlled, by the way, through leaders' dominant ego, emotions and behavioural patterns. And this is what separates different governments to become extremely dominant and controlling, some corrupt and some not so corrupt. This is the reason that all governments are still currently separated and fractured, meaning that we have not yet learned to work together as a global collective, free from all ego emotions. This is the reason that many of these corrupt governments will continue to exploit all vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature, including all of our different Earth's resources. This is the reason that it would be impossible to resolve any of these very urgent environmental issues unless we can all work together as a global collective in harmony and balance with each other, just like the Bee Kingdom's community. This is the reason that it's urgently important for us all to begin a brand new collective global earth government as a major short-term solution, so that each person in each country joins together through a collective global dialogue free from all ego emotions, so that we all work together to discover new solutions to protect our earth before it's too late. Just like all bees in the bee colony work for the collective protection of the bee colony's survival, and similar to the ant colony's survival, and nearly all species of insects, plants and animals that simply survive through the greater good and protection of the species' survival. However, most of mankind has not yet learnt these concepts that can be discovered only through our highly evolved altruistic emotions and behaviours of the collective consciousness, because we are still functioning more dominantly through our own individual I am ego emotions that focuses on self and our own individual and close families' self-preservation and self-protection. This is also the reason that each individual country has their very own individual agendas, simply for the benefits of each individual country's survival. And this is the reason that none of these very serious environmental issues will ever get resolved unless all people in all countries can come together and join together, so that the power of the global collective effort through global dialogue and global actions will begin to protect all vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature, and in doing so protect all of our lives and the lives for all future generations to come. This is the reason that some of these major short-term solutions is for us all to begin a brand new collective global earth government, so that all people in all countries get involved in global decision making through global voting systems that is free from all ego emotions and all ego greed for financial profits, and instead we all work together in peace and harmony with each other to resolve all of these very serious environmental issues. Like all of you reading this book, I am a citizen of our earth, and this is no small honour. For generations, men and women have been born and died as citizens of our earth. And as citizens, we all carry a burning responsibility to protect our earth. This means that when we elect men or women to public office, we cannot do this as lightly as we flip a coin. It means that after we've elected them, we can't just sit back and say our job is done and what they do now doesn't concern us any longer. This is what corrupt governments want us to do, so that they can grow strong. And this is when the heroic struggle that welds billions of people together means nothing. Then we are not citizens, but traitors to our earth. And these great liberties by which our earth has allowed us all to live for millions of years will be bought by corruption. It's a bit like buying a sweet apple and then finding out its core is rotten. This is why the kind of government we need is a government run by all global people, for all global people. However, this can mean any kind of government. Therefore, it's our collective global duty to make it only one kind, ego-free and united, a collective global Earth government that focuses on the collective global protection of all vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature, and in doing so, protects all of our lives and all the lives for all future generations to come. We are going to talk more about these very urgent short-term solutions at the very end of this chapter, because some of the most urgent solutions that we can all make today is for every single one of us to collectively work together to stop buying billions of different unnecessary consumer products, because many of these consumer products are manufactured through using billions of tons of paper, cardboard, and all different wood products, plastics, metals, rare earth metals, glass and minerals, etc. And because many of these earth resources are now becoming scarce, industries are clearing large hectares of land and forest land in order to try to find these resources. Therefore, if we all help and all cease buying consumer products that rely on wood, for instance, the demands for wood will cease. And once the demands cease, the suppliers will stop cutting down trees in our forests and rainforests. The same applies to all of our different digital technologies and many different consumer products, because many of our digital technologies need to be manufactured with rare earth metals and metals that are mined and extracted through clearing hundreds of hectares of trees in our forests and rainforest areas. We must all begin to collectively work together to persuade all of our high-tech and consumer manufacturers to find sustainable solutions to manufacture our high-tech and consumer products. Because currently, many digital technologies and consumer products have a very short lifespan, deliberately so that we continue to buy new and updated models regularly. Because the more we buy, the more the manufacturers make profits. This is simply the manufacturer's extreme ego greed, with no concerns for the protection of our Earth's resources. The same applies to other resources, such as natural gas, coal, crude oil, metals, minerals and rare earth metals, etc., that we are going to discuss in much more detail shortly. There are now reports that identify that half of the trees that are logged in the Amazon rainforests are not replaced, causing huge increases in carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases entering into our Earth's atmosphere. This is the reason that it's up to all of us to collectively come together to create less consumer spending, so that we all also begin to persuade our high-tech digital manufacturers and all consumer manufacturers to begin inventing new and modern technologies that have a very long lifespan, so that if our technologies break down or need updating, the manufacturers can repair or update them regularly. And finally, we need to all work together to all stop buying intensive farm agricultural foods, because along with many of the reasons that we have already mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, some intensive farmers are currently cutting down millions of trees in our forests and rainforests to make way for large hectares of new intensive agricultural farmland. This is the reason that the most immediate and urgent short-term solutions for all of these more serious deforestation issues is to learn through the examples of a small but very important group of tree planting volunteers that are not waiting for governments to support them, but taking action to volunteer their time, hard work, and sometimes even their own hard-earned money to plant trees throughout our lands, woodlands and forests and rainforest areas in many countries all over the world today, without expecting anything in return, no monetary rewards, no praise and no recognition. These very special volunteers range from local groups in villages and local communities to individual volunteers that plant thousands of new sapling trees alone. Many of these volunteers are able to achieve these reforestation projects by building young sapling tree nurseries that grow millions of young trees, and once the trees are mature enough to plant out, they go about the lands and forests planting the trees, but the volume of trees is not important. The important issue is that they are taking urgent action. They are not waiting for governments or other financial support to take action. Instead, they simply plant trees because they understand these very urgent and very serious environmental concerns. This is the reason that these highly evolved individuals are all of our unsung heroes. They are also thousands of other non-profit Earth Guardian groups and communities all over our world today that are working for the protection of all vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature in all different non-profit capacities. And this is the reason that you will find a small list in the index in the second half of this book, section 2, so that you can make your own research in your own time and at your own leisure. Intensive animal farming, also known as industrial livestock production or factory farming. Do you remember at the very beginning of this book when we mentioned that from the very first day that we are all first born, all humans and also all animals are motivated by one emotion only, love, whether this was more love given or more love taken away. This is the reason that most animals have been greatly misunderstood by all us humans throughout the centuries. Because unlike all humans, all animals remain all of their lives only functioning through their pure, childlike and innocent emotional capacities, similar to a very small child's emotional capacity that is based only on emotions of love. Because animals' brains never mature like the brains of humans. But because all of us humans' brains mature in adulthood, we assume that the minds of all animals know what we are thinking, but they don't know what we are thinking. Their brains never mature. All animals simply remain as pure and innocent with pure and innocent childlike emotions all of their lives. But because animals cannot speak, they cannot tell us that they don't know what we are thinking. Because all animals are not that clever, their pure and innocent childlike emotions mean that all they want to do all of their lives is simply to play, eat and sleep and remain protected and safe without emotions of fear. Because, as mentioned earlier, from the day that all animals are first born, they are motivated by one emotion only, love. But this is not love in the same sense as human love. This is unconditional love, meaning that animals' love is not based on what somebody does for them. It's love with no strings attached. Because unconditional love is when you love someone no matter what they do. And this is the reason that most animals have been greatly misunderstood by all us humans. Because although they will continue to love us no matter what we do to them, they too have long-term memories and will remember abuse and mistreatment that any human does to them. But they don't have the mental capacity to take revenge on us humans. They just continue to love us unconditionally. This is why the love from an animal, any animal, is even our farm animals, is far greater than any other love. And this is why all animals also remember all people that are kind, compassionate and caring towards them. But imagine now that you were a farm animal, lined up in a huge queue at a slaughterhouse, ready to be slaughtered. How would that make you feel? Imagine it. Because now that we know that all animals cannot speak of their fears and function only through their pure and innocent childlike emotions all of their lives, what do you think all of these billions of farm animals are feeling when they are lined up at these slaughterhouse gates and the rough treatment of the slaughterhouse workers ready to be the next meal on our dinner plates? The fear that these farm animals must go through cannot be described in words in this book, because now that we are nearly 8 billion plus people living on our fragile planet Earth, and now that a large percentage of us still eat meat, imagine all of the fear, pain and suffering that billions of farm animals are going through each day, waiting in line to be slaughtered, just so that all us humans can enjoy these small daily pleasures of slaughtered animal. The love that I have for all animals makes it unbearable for me to even think of this enormous suffering, because now that we have huge growth in overpopulation in many countries all over our world today, 90% of our farmers have recently began, over the last 2 decades, a new kind of adaptation referred to as intensive animal farming or industrial livestock production, also known as factory farming, where most intensive farmers are producing farm animals that are specifically bred to maximise production while minimising costs, so that most intensive farm animals are now reared simply as an agribusiness through different livestock production with high stock densities of cattle, pigs, sheep, fish and poultry, with billions of farm animals confined indoors and restricted in small pens or cages, unable to move around and unable to communicate with each other and all the other farm animals, and continuously fed to fatten up quickly, ready for slaughter for our own human consumption, using modern machinery. and some even making long-distance distribution through live cargo and through global trade by shipping large numbers of live animals that are confined and crammed into small spaces for days on end, unable to move around, and sometimes with no water or food. This is the reason that many don't even make it to the slaughterhouse and their end destination. So what's the difference between the inhumane lives of trillions of intensive farm animals and the more humane lives of organic or regenerative farm animals? Intensive farm animals are supplemented with antibiotics, vaccines and growth hormones so that animals remain healthier so that they can be quickly fattened up for slaughter. And by doing this, the intensive farmers maximise profits while minimising their costs of animal wastage. This is why intensive farm animals are now merely recognised by the intensive farmers as a profitable business, with billions of our wonderful, pure, innocent, sentient beings slaughtered daily. Intensive farm animals practices are now recognised as a trillion-dollar profitable agribusiness and can be found in most highly populated countries. This is why intensive farm animals are no longer recognised to have feelings and emotions of fear, hurt, pain or suffering. There is no time for sentimentality. Intensive farmers have now turned their backs on our friends, the farm animals. The consequences of this are now currently beginning to show all over our world today. However, the big question that we all need to ask ourselves is why are all slaughterhouses secretly hidden away from our sight, hidden away from most of the human population? If we relate this same scenario to the atrocities that occurred in the concentration camps in the Second World War, we also knew that these camps were secretly hidden away because of the cruel and inhumane acts happening within these camps. Many of us will say that animals are different because animals are not equal to human life. But why do we consider the lives of farm animals or any animals to be unimportant and insignificant? And because animals cannot speak for themselves and are not able to speak of all of these atrocities, this doesn't mean that they don't have emotions of fear, hurt, pain and suffering. And does this give most of us humans the right to cause such extreme fear, pain and suffering to all of these billions of intensive farm animals daily? This is why slaughterhouses are secretly hidden from our human sight, because it's such a horrific event that we don't want to upset ourselves. We simply want to bury our heads and pretend that the piece of bacon that's sitting on our plate didn't have feelings and emotions and didn't feel huge amounts of fear, hurt, pain and suffering. If we took a few moments to reflect back on our own childhood when we were all very young children from the age of newborn to approximately 3 years old, you would remember that you were completely helpless and you relied on your mother or father or whoever brought you up as a child to look after you, feed you, nurture you, clothe you, protect you, give you love and attention and keep you warm, comfortable and safe, etc. Because all that you could do as a very young child was to eat, sleep and play. Just take a few moments to acknowledge your life as a very young child. You couldn't speak, walk, talk or make any decisions for yourself. You had to rely solely on your parents for their protection, love, safety, food and comfort. This is how all animals live their entire lives, through pure, innocent and childlike emotions and feelings, because as mentioned earlier, all animals also have a long-term memory, but all animals' brains never develop and never mature like our human brains mature in adulthood. But all animals have long-term memories, including all of our pets, our farm animals, all wild animals, reptiles, rodents, birds, apes and monkeys and all other sentient beings that belong to our vulnerable and fragile planet Earth. This is how the parents of most animals teach their offspring how to hunt for food, etc., or how to fly as fledgling birds, or how to migrate when the weather patterns change, etc., so that they learn these necessary tools for survival at a very young age. And once they learn, they remember so that the parents can safely leave them to survive when they mature, because all of this time, their long-term memories are having to store this information for their survival. We know that all animals have a long-term memory because if you've ever known a stray animal, like a stray dog or stray cat, that has been abused in some way, we know that these animals never ever forget this abuse and will always remain scared, untrustworthy, and vigilant of us humans for the rest of their lives. This is the reason that it sometimes takes a great deal of time for many of our pets that were once strays to trust their owners. There are thousands of incredibly highly evolved individuals that are helping stray animals all over our world today, who volunteer their time in all different capacities to provide unconditional love, food, warmth, comfort and shelter, and to care for, respect, give loving kindness and compassion for the protection of millions of our different stray sentient beings, mostly without expecting anything in return. No monetary rewards, no praise, and no recognition, simply because these individuals are functioning more dominantly in the long-term memory with their highly evolved altruistic emotions, and have gained the advanced emotions of heightened awareness, so that they are able to recognize the suffering of stray animals that are unable to talk for themselves and speak of their fears and their suffering. There are thousands of different non-profit stray animal shelters, non-profit farm animal sanctuaries, non-profit wildlife protection sanctuaries, non-profit wildlife trusts, non-profit marine protection charities, horse sanctuaries, vegans and vegetarians, and many other different amazing individuals that are working for the protection of all vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature in all different non-profit capacities. And that is why you will find a list of many of these very special individuals in the index in the second half of this book, section 2. To earn the trust of an animal, any animal, even birds or wild animals, even all of our wonderful friends the farm animals, takes a great deal of time and patience. And it's a very long and slow process that requires a great deal of heightened awareness and unconditional love, loving kindness, compassion and comfort, food, warmth, security, shelter and protection, just like we give to all of our pets. This is why we can learn a great deal from our wonderful friends, the animals. It's simply a matter of learning the language of animals. Have you ever heard a loyal dog that lays down and beside the grave of their dead master for many months, hoping that their master will return? Or the millions of loyal horses that courageously laid down their lives, fighting along many of our ancestors in all of these thousands of past wars and battles throughout mankind's history? And what about millions of our horses, cows and oxen that ploughed all of our agricultural fields for centuries before tractors were invented? and all of the millions of donkeys throughout the centuries that carried all of our heavy water, food, wood, and crops. Most horses and donkeys have been ignored for all of their hard and back-breaking work throughout all of mankind's history, but horses, donkeys, and mules have been the main support for protecting the survival of most of our ancestors for many thousands of years. But many of them were merely treated as a working commodity, simply because they weren't able to speak of their suffering. And for centuries we have taken milk and cheese from our cows, goats, and sheep, and eggs from our chickens, without honouring all of the hard work and gifts we have been given from our wonderful friends, the animals. I remember a few years ago watching a very old documentary that showed the workings of the Marrakesh markets in Morocco in the early 1900s. The cobbled streets were heaving with thousands of people, and it was so busy that all of the people were bumping into each other through the hustle and bustle of the street markets. And there, in the middle of the street, was a very sad, very old, and very tired donkey carrying two huge, heavy baskets of goods. And not one single person took a single bit of notice of this small, neglected donkey slowly struggling through these small cobbled streets. It was something that I will never forget, because it reminded me that many of us simply don't consider the lives of animals worthy of our respect, kindness, compassion. But even though animals cannot speak, all animals still feel the emotions of fear, abandonment, hunger, hurt, pain, and suffering, just like all humans feel these emotions and feelings. And all animals still need affection and attention, still need protection, still need compassion, still need loving kindness, still need warmth, comfort, food, and shelter, still need respect and dignity, and most of all, still need love, just like all humans need all of these basic needs, because all animals also have their own characters, just like all people have their own characters. So how does organic and regenerative animal farming practices help to bring respect and dignity to our wonderful friends, the farm animals, and at the same time helps prevent any further global warming and climate change issues? Eating organic and regenerative farm animals is still greatly disrespectful for the lives of farm animals. Of course, the most humane lifestyle switch would be to become an organic vegan or organic vegetarian. However, we all know that it takes a long time to adapt our food habits. Nonetheless, the enormous benefits of becoming a vegan or vegetarian far outweighs and has far-reaching positive effects for the dignity and respect for all of the billions of intensive farm animals that are currently suffering throughout all of these modern factory farming practices throughout our modern world today. And becoming an organic vegan or organic vegetarian would also have far-reaching positive effects for the future of our own human health, the health of our fertile agricultural soils, for the health and protection of our planet, not to mention the far-reaching positive effects for the protection of our insect populations, bee populations, wildlife, birds, natural habitats, hedgerows, streams, rivers, oceans that would all begin to flourish and thrive again and return back to harmony and balance with the rest of all Earth's nature. But why would organic or regenerative farm animals help to bring respect and dignity to our wonderful friends, the farm animals, and at the same time help to protect and prevent any further global warming and climate change issues? Organic and regenerative farm animals have to be certified, in other words, checked to make sure that they are grazed outdoors in the open green grass fields, so that the animals remain in their natural environments. That brings more dignity and respect to the animals. And many other farm animals, such as pigs, sheep, goats, cows, chickens, etc., are grazed through a rotation system so that the farmers retain the fertility and growth of the new grass supply in the fields. This is the reason that many organic farmers fence off sections of their grass fields in divisions so that the farm animals remain in spacious grass fields. And once the farm animals eat the grass down to a level low enough, the farm animals will then be moved to the next section of fenced off grass field to wait for the previous grass to grow back. And some farm animals even allow free-range organic chickens to be placed into the field with the farm animals so that the chickens eat the parasites and any bugs found in the farm animals' manure, etc. This keeps the farm animals and also grass fields healthy, fertilised and bug-free. And through this continuous grass rotation process, the manure of the farm animals also acts as a fertiliser, giving nutrients and organic matter to the soil that keeps the new growth of the grass healthy. At the same time, provides adequate carbon capture through trillions of mycorrhiza that remains deep in the grass roots and soil structure, and this prevents huge amounts of carbon dioxide from entering into our Earth's atmospheric ozone, similar to the need for all tree reforestation projects. This is why organic and regenerative animal farming holds very effective solutions for the prevention of many of our very serious global warming issues today. Because as we mentioned earlier, mycorrhiza holds a symbiotic association between plant roots and fungi, and therefore their major role is to enhance nutrient, carbon dioxide and water uptake. This is the reason that all organic and regenerative farming practices hold many of the solutions to rescue the health of our climate and many of our environmental concerns today, the health of all of our edible foods, the health of our agricultural soils, the dignity and respect of our farm animals, the protection of our bee populations, our insect populations, our birds and wildlife populations, and all nature's natural habitats, and all nature's natural biodiversity, because all organic and regenerative farming practices remain in harmony and balance with nature.